Think about what if we ran the police department as a private sector, which we did years ago, and who gets protected? Well, only the wealthy.
Yeah.
So there is no protection whatsoever for the poor, where there's actually more likely to be a lot of crime. Because if you want to make a profitable police department, you don't sell a subscription to someone who's actually going to need police protection. Or when you do, it's considerably more expensive. Another example I use a lot when I'm giving talks on this and so forth is, what if the U.S. Army was a private sector undertaking? It'd be like you'd hear, hello, are you the woman of the house? Yes, I am Captain Johnson. Are you afraid of Canadians? Me too. And so we have 3 levels of protection against Canadian incursion, and you'd have to sell a subscription like this. And then the U.S. Army would have to train troops. Well, we would certainly all be speaking German now if that's the way we actually ran the military. And everyone would say, well, that's stupid. We can't do it that way.
This is the MMT Podcast with Patricia Pino and Christian Riley. Hi, I'm Christian Riley and welcome to the Modern Monetary Theory Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at MMT Podcast, and you can support the show by going to patreon.com/MMT Podcast. For as little as $1 a month, you can get early access to all our episodes and patron-only episodes. A big thank you to all our supporters so far. At the beginning there, you heard our guest this week, Professor John T Harvey, describing what the police and army would look like if they were run along the same lines as the US healthcare system. And it underlines that on both sides of the pond, we don't seem to notice or attach any importance to the fact that the army, the police, the fire service are all public services distributed by need rather than income. And as John has said in the past, that's a socialist model. So if your house is burning down, you call the fire brigade and they send a fire truck without you having to get your credit card out or having to worry about what's covered or not covered by your emergency fire protection plan. Because for now, protection from burning to death, even as a result of your own negligence, is a product distributed by need rather than income. And that makes sense to us. But not so when it comes to healthcare. Even in the UK, where we love the NHS, we still have a wide range of profit-driven private healthcare providers. So as I see it, as much as we love the NHS, we've normalised the idea that if a person can pay more, they should be able to buy better healthcare. So to me, that says that we're accepting a 2-tier system that distributes what many consider to be a human right by income rather than need. So pardon the ideological rant, but I think whether a person lives or dies or gets relief from illness or a chronic health condition should have nothing to do with that person's bank balance. Just my opinion. I say let the person who's done well for themselves spend their extra money on yachts or fine art or MMT Podcast Patreon subscriptions. There's a link in the show notes. Okay, rant over. In this episode, Professor Harvey walks us through the implications of distributing healthcare via a market system as they do in the US and as we have begun to do in the UK. As John said in episode 18, markets are just a tool among many tools, and I think it falls to us as participants in a democracy to figure out whether it's the most appropriate tool for the job of distributing a given resource. So, in the conversation that follows, John lays out the conditions that need to be met for markets to function competitively and therefore serve to make the sellers in the market accountable to the buyers. Is it possible to have these conditions met when it comes to buying and selling a thing like healthcare? Where MMT comes in is its insight into how governments spend. What actually happens in the real world? Well, the process is this. The government passes a budget, and included in that budget are the salaries of nurses and doctors and orderlies and cleaners and administrators, IT firms, building contractors, on and on. Everything you need to have a national health service. When the budget is passed, the government tells its central bank, which it owns, to credit the necessary bank accounts of the people and institutions necessary to make the government's policy goals reality. The pounds needed are spent into existence using keystrokes at the central bank. Currency issuing governments like the one we have here in the UK can never run out of their own currency. This is also true for Australia, the US, Japan, and Canada, to name a few. So, can governments with fiat currencies afford a fully funded universal healthcare system? Well, in terms of money, yes. The country might run out of real things like doctors or nurses or materials for hip replacements, but not money. If the things the government needs to buy, labour and materials, if they exist in the real world and are priced in that government's currency, a monetarily sovereign government can afford to spend whatever it wants on whatever it wants without operational financial limit. So it's not a question of can we collect enough pounds via taxation to fund the NHS? It's a question of do we have the real things, the people, the materials, the know-how to provision the NHS? Because when you're a monetarily sovereign government, a currency issuer, it's not the case that you collect money, which you issue, remember, in order to pile it up so you can spend it out again. That's how you and me as private individuals operate when we have to fund something, because we're currency users, not issuers. A government that issues its own currency taxes its population not to get currency, but to get the population to need its currency, to create people willing to sell their time and labour in order to earn the money they need to pay their taxes. This creates sellers of the real things that the government needs to provision itself, and the government can then go ahead and spend its otherwise worthless pieces of paper into existence to buy those real things and use them to provision the country with, say, an army or firefighters or a world-class national health service. Money is a policy tool used to move resources from the private sector into public sector use. And you can listen to our episodes from the beginning if you need more detail on how government spending works and how taxation drives currency in modern money systems. So before we dive in, just to let you know, I'm developing an MMT live show, and if you want to see how that's coming along, I'll be performing it at the Leicester Comedy Festival on the 5th, 12th and 19th of February, and at the Glasgow Comedy Festival on the 22nd of March 2020. There's links for tickets for those performances in the show notes. So thanks for your support, thanks for listening and learning about modern money. Let's dive in. Hi, John. Welcome back to the MMT podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolute pleasure, as always. So we're going to talk about something you wrote in 2010 called Healthcare Economics. And it looks to me it was a response to the passing into law of Obamacare. And it was on your blog, but it's not available at the moment. But you kindly shared it with me. We'll go through it in a minute. But I'm just going to say there's a cultural difference between the UK and the US on healthcare. Across the political spectrum in Britain, people love the NHS, and as proof, I'm going to cite a YouGov poll that I just found from November the 13th, 2019, where 63% of Britons said they would support raising national insurance by 1% if that money was used to increase spending on the NHS, and even 50% of Conservative voters, 51% of Brexit Party voters, they support a tax increase to increase spending on the NHS. So what I take from that is, in spite of the ideological assault it's been under since its inception, in spite of the last 10 years of deliberate underfunding and the resulting destruction of the service, the majority of Britons not only support the NHS, but they understand that it's collectively provisioned. They're willing to sacrifice some of their own comfort by giving up some of their hard-earned income to provision it. So, ideologically, we don't have the same battle that you guys have over there. It's just perceived as socialism. And so, but anyway, let's put to one side that's not how government spending works. They don't take the money in and spend it out again.
Right.
But I'm just saying it says something that makes me happy about Britons, that collective provisioning makes sense to us when it comes to healthcare. And I'm sure that even among Britons who support privatising the NHS, what they mean is they feel that the system's not working. We can see that. Maybe introducing so-called market discipline into the NHS will make it more efficient, and that'll cure the shortages and the waiting lists. But that's where your writing comes in. So you start your look at healthcare economics by emphasising that markets are just a tool among other policy tools, not positive, not negative, and the task should be to evaluate whether it's the right tool for distributing healthcare in a nation such as the US. Would you like to say something about that? Tell us about the tool shed.
Yeah, very much so. And if I may back up just a bit,
sure.
The blog post from 2010 was actually from my online computer gaming group. crusty old fossil rockers where we were very active in playing Counter-Strike, and found that the dumb kids who played Counter-Strike were doing things like killing all the members of their own team, this sort of thing. So we started our own group to sort of hide from all of them. And then when the financial crisis happened, lots of my friends in crusty old fossil rockers not only wanted to shoot at me, but also wanted to know about the financial crisis. So I started a little blog, something I thought I would never do. And you're absolutely right. This particular entry was in response to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. And the way I approach these issues and I'm sorry, one more piece of background information. Of course, I was born in Edgware in London, and my mom's family are all from London, and they cannot even begin to imagine what my parents go through. My parents have to do things like pay for an ambulance. My mother had a medical emergency at a doctor's office that was across the street from the hospital. My parents also pay an annual fee for a ambulance service, which but they didn't call for that ambulance while my mother was unconscious. They called for a different one, so they had to pay for an ambulance. So things that people in other countries can't even begin to imagine happen over here. So anyway. So I also have very much that same philosophy that the Britons do. I mean, you don't see America. In fact, I'm jumping to the end of this because I'll fill in the gaps later. But I jump to the end of this piece here and I say, well, Americans, those of you that are against universal health care, but okay with fire departments, but okay with police departments, but okay with the U.S. military, what to you is the difference? And if you can't think of a difference, that should bother you. So anyway, going back to trying to be very pragmatic about this, there are some things that I honestly believe that the market does fairly well. Restaurant industry works pretty well. I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, sort of small level entrepreneurs, are undertaking a very creative task. That most of them, if you ask them why did they get into starting a restaurant or starting a small business, their answer is not to make a lot of money. Their answer is they want to be their own boss, and they want to feel like they've contributed something. So I really appreciate that. I think that should be valued in our culture as much as someone deciding to put together a soup kitchen for the homeless. I don't think it is, but I think nevertheless that these people are not bad people. And I further would say that there are some industries where and I hate to use the word free market, but where the free market works better. Now, so what I did in this piece was I said, okay, look, we need to decide. Well, let me back up to my analogy that I use all the time. What if carpenters had some sort of moral, philosophical preference for certain tools? That there were like hammer carpenters, And in the same sense, in the same way that we have people that are devoted to the free market, and that doing anything other than the free market, using a government or government, and I hate this word too, interference, that's somehow against the natural order. What if carpenters did that? What if, Bob, we have this big piece of wood we need to make into two smaller pieces of wood. Oh, give it here. I'll use my hammer on it. Well, wouldn't a saw be better? Oh my God, are you a socialist? Why would you use a saw? Well, because a saw works better, and that's all we care about. And I don't think that carpenters struggle with these decisions. Gosh, I don't know. I hate using screwdrivers, and so I don't know if maybe I should just hammer this screw in. They don't. They say, well, it works better. I use this. It doesn't work better. I use something else. So we actually do, to some extent, the same thing in our own, even in the U.S., which is relatively more free market leaning. And so what sort of criteria should we set ahead of time to decide whether or not we should use the market system or use some hybrid or the government to provide a service? And so what I did in this blog entry was I said, okay, well, the ultimate goal is to make the provider of the service answerable to us. That is the ultimate goal, whether it be in the market or in the government. They should be answerable to us. This goes back to the political and economic revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries. That only I can give you the right to govern me, but you don't just have it. All right. So and of course the fact that Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations was 1776, the same year as the armed tax evaders in the U.S. Were fighting, declaring their independence from England, is not just a coincidence. You should be answerable to us. Okay, so what in the political realm makes people answerable to us? Well, hopefully voting. It's much more complicated. It doesn't always work, but let's just leave that there for now. And then let's go to the market side. And by the way, capitalism is supposed to be very much philosophically and morally about the consumer, not about the entrepreneur. Adam Smith's point in 1776 is that you can't trust the entrepreneur. That's why we must set them at each other's throat and have them fight it out with each other to gain our favor. You
include that great quote by Adam Smith, actually.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I've got it here if you want. People of the
people of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices. And so, he's saying you can't trust them. So what can we do about that? Well, we can set them at each other's throats. And what is it that is most likely to create a situation in which they are fighting with each other for our favor by offering us, good products at a low price or whatever? Well, there's lots of things, but I narrowed it down to four here. One, very, very common economic, very standard economic theory here. One is there needs to be many sellers, all right? And I compared several industries. One of them was restaurants, right? So, and in, let's see here, this is retail trade. I found out when I did this originally that there was one restaurant for every 320 people in the United States, right? So there are many, many sellers. If you don't like what this restaurant is selling, I'll just go somewhere else, all right? So that's a good thing in terms of restaurants are forced to please us. And indeed, from what I understand, rates of return in restaurants are very low. And it's a very good industry to get into if you want to lose money. And many, many hours of your life. The other thing that they talk about in economics is easy entry, which of course goes very closely with many sellers. It must be easy to get in and out, so that and this is particularly useful if an industry is becoming popular. We've discovered that potatoes cure cancer. All right, so all of a sudden everyone wants to get into potato farming. Well, if it's not that hard to get into the potato farming, then it will stay a relatively competitive industry. Now, homogeneous products. This one never works, all right? But it's sort of a theoretical extreme that the more similar products are to each other, then the more difficult it is for the entrepreneur to screw you over, all right? For example, now restaurants, well, and it depends on how you define the category. Restaurants sell food. Okay, yeah, that's right, but it's different kinds of food. So now you get a question of, well, consumer, would you rather have every restaurant sell the exact same thing, which would make them much more competitive? Or would you rather have some variety? Because after all, that's the whole reason why we want to go to McDonald's rather than Taco Bell, or rather, than I don't know what other chains there are in Britain right now.
We have Subway.
Subway, yeah.
If you're looking for a common ground.
Yeah, well, one of the most depressing things, I guess, when I went back to London in 1980, is leaving Heathrow. We saw things like 7-Elevens and stuff like that, and I don't know if that all the same stores we've got over here. I was like, oh well, that's the way it goes. But anyway, the more alike the products are, the more competition there will be. And then last, and this one's particularly important as I get into healthcare. There should be plentiful and accurate information for both sides, all right? When I go into a restaurant, generally speaking, they don't do a credit check first. Food's not that expensive, and at restaurants where it is expensive, it's probably going to be fairly obvious from your dress and so forth whether or not you can afford the meal. That's not going to be true if you're going to buy a car or whatever. Then they're going to do a credit check. But that's on the seller's side, what they're worried about. On the buyer's side, I want to know what I'm getting. And the good thing about food, sticking with restaurants, is that I can experiment. It's not that expensive. I can go every other day, and I don't know what it looks like in the kitchen. and here's the role for government intervention. Unless we are all experts on hygiene and we all insist on, gosh, I'd love to eat here, but may I have a kitchen tour first? Then we'd rather, my assumption is, we'd rather have someone else do that for us, all right? So, but generally speaking, restaurants are extremely competitive, and I don't see any reason why, and I have to say I was laughing at my own jokes here because I hadn't read this in a long time. My conclusion was the restaurant industry seems to be pretty dang competitive. Let's let the market handle that. There's no need for the government to start its own chain of hamburger stands. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all meals are tasty at Honest Abe's Burger Cabin. All right, so we don't need that. That's not really necessary. There are no government restaurants, so far as I know, and nor is that something that would be particularly useful. Well, now, then I went through retail trade, but let's just jump right into healthcare now. And so we've got those same issues. We've got the issue of, are there a lot of, are there many sellers? And the quick answer is no. In fact, when I was researching this, that was a long time ago. 10 years ago. It turns out that the American Medical Association, which is if anyone knows anything about it, it's all the doctors. It's a fairly conservative group. They had been complaining in their annual report for years that the government had allowed too many mergers in the healthcare industry, that there were fewer and fewer, people talk about, well, I want a choice. Well, you don't have one now.
Might be worth just stepping in here and talking about the 4-firm concentration that you talked about in the paper. Yeah.
Right. And at first glance, the 4-firm concentration ratio doesn't look too bad. But then when you break it down by metropolitan area, and this is a quote from the document from the American Medical Association, again, a very conservative group. The study finds that virtually all health insurance markets are highly concentrated. In 92% of all the metropolitan areas examined, one or more insurers had a share of 30% or greater, and 54% of them had an insurer of at least 50% or greater. And so, and if I may continue the quote from the document, these findings indicate proposed mergers and acquisitions ought to be seriously questioned by the public. Well, we pretty much stopped enforcing antitrust laws around Reagan, right. I believe.
Yes.
And so, and we get this whole idea that is sold to us by those who have succeeded in the market, that anything that is somehow, interfering with what the free market, I should stop using free market, with what industry, with what business wants to do, is somehow anti-competitive. And that's not true. Business wants to violate these rules that I laid out. Business wants fewer sellers. Business wants products that are not homogeneous. I use an example in here. When I was in college, that's when the Sony Walkman first came out. And it was superior to every other, personal stereo out there. And so, in fact, my wife would see me with these headphones all the time on campus, and she would tell me that if you don't turn that down, one day you won't be able to hear anything. And fortunately, I can no longer hear her, so I can't. But I do have that tinnitus or whatever, that constant high pitch. But how can you listen to the Clash on a low level? But anyway, that's a whole different thing. But nevertheless,
I think that's science. That is science, mate.
Exactly. It's pragmatism. But here's the thing about the Sony Walkman. So they had the best product. So they made the plug-in on, if you wanted to plug it into the wall, they made the plug that goes into the Sony Walkman a funny shape, so that you had to spend 4 times as much to buy just the same adapter as anybody else. And now, is that good or bad? One might argue, well, good for Sony. They were able to make this great product and then drain income from you because they know that theirs is better, so they're going to charge 4 times as much for the adapter. Or does one say, well, this now screws over the consumer, that really I'm not getting anything more than I would have otherwise in terms of the plug-in. And so, and that's kind of the trade-off there. I don't think it's a good thing. I think that the standardization is actually, what's better for the consumer.
Yeah. Let's let all that brain power dedicated to innovation go somewhere else, rather than how can we put on another marginal tax?
Right. Squeeze a few more pennies out of somebody. Well, so
can we just jump in and just clarify a couple of things? So for British listeners, when you say antitrust, Over in Britain, we call that the competition laws. So for any British listeners, we're talking about the laws that break up monopolies, basically. Am I right there, John? Mm-hmm. We don't hear antitrust so much over here. And then the other thing is that the four-firm concentration thing that we mentioned a few beats ago, that is the percentage of sales dominated by the top four firms. And in your paper, you say the rule of thumb is that if this is below 40%, it's competitive. Right. Above that, you start to take a second look, though you don't necessarily do anything. But, that's the...
Right. There's sort of a rule of thumb. Do we have a lot of sellers in the healthcare industry? No. Do we have easy entry? Gee, I think I'm trying to decide between starting a restaurant and starting my own healthcare firm. Insurance. No, it's not easy to get into this industry, which is part of why it's so concentrated.
Yeah.
Now, the homogeneous products, which I just sort of gotten up to, is that I don't know. It's really hard to tell over here what you're buying. I don't know if British listeners are in any way familiar with this, but there are some things that are fairly clear. How much it costs you to go. I don't know if they have a similar concept. They're a copay. That I may go to my doctor and it costs me $30 for an office visit. That's usually pretty clear. Okay, but then my mother just had a botched colonoscopy, which, by the way, is not a reason not to get a colonoscopy because she'd had one before, which discovered cancer and cured it. But this one was some years later, and the surgeon accidentally perforated the colon, and she was in intensive care for 8 days and almost died. But we had no idea how much was really going to be covered. And this is, I'm jumping ahead here a bit, but this is probably an ideal time to say this. When health insurance is offered by the private sector, and this is exactly what I was thinking when you were talking about Britons who think, well, let's introduce some market competition, some market discipline. Market, that means profit. And it is not profitable to insure people who need insurance, and it is not profitable to pay out when they make a claim. And that is the basic common bottom line problem with private sector health insurance, that they have to make a profit. Are they evil? Well, maybe, but that's not the point. The point is that the system requires that they make a profit if they're going to please their stockholders and feed their families and so forth. So, and over here we have this thing, pre-existing conditions, which I saw a post one time. That's like the same thing as your health history. That's all it is. But in America, they call it pre-existing conditions. How healthy are you? Well, why do you want to know? Because we don't want to insure you if you're not healthy. Not only did we have this, so my parents, my mother had this catastrophe here, and then ended up in a rehab facility, which, by the way, is not for drugs. I don't know, use the same term over there. But not the sort that Amy Winehouse, God rest her soul, sings about. But a different rehab. She was in there for, 3 weeks, a month, something like that. And we never knew. And here's the other thing. After you think it's done, you still get bills. Like a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, sometimes 6 months later, some bill shows up. What the hell is this? I thought I'd paid everything. And so they're all still negotiating with each other who they can push it off onto. Now, I am very lucky. At my university, we have a fantastic, healthcare. So I'm very fortunate. But, the general situation is that in terms of homogeneous products, do all insurance companies offer similar, products? Well, I'm not even sure. They also will then... It's difficult to get an answer from them a priori, how much of this will you cover? Because then the rules change. And if there was lots of competition, which there isn't, then you can say, well, I'm going to somebody else. But you can't. Furthermore, oftentimes in the U.S., health insurance is being offered by your employer, so it's not like I have a choice. Again, I'm lucky. And let me say something about that. Oh, I guess actually I've already drifted into plentiful and accurate information for the buyer and seller. It's very important to the seller that they know how healthy you are, because they don't want to insure you if you're not, or they want to charge you higher rates. But the plentiful and accurate information on the part of the buyer is absolutely not true with healthcare. It is terrible. So what I was going to say was, I have now already forgotten.
We could just recap then. So what we've done here is we've talked about the 4 conditions that need to be met for markets to be the appropriate tool for competition to actually exist. To recap, they are many sellers, easy entry, homogeneous products, and plentiful and accurate information for the buyer and the seller. There are other conditions that make markets competitive and functional, but those four things definitely need to be there. So we went through that with healthcare, and like you say, there's plenty of information for the seller on the buyer. You know, the healthcare insurer gets your whole medical history, and like you say, they put you under the microscope and go, "How sick are you?" Because we need to know how badly to shaft you. But then on the other end, you're saying that you've bought their healthcare insurance. Now, we're not even talking about uninsured people. We're talking about somebody that's bought the insurance. Right. You're still there going, you don't know which bill's coming next. You don't know what's covered. Right. You know, it would be one thing if you were able to hold your hand up and go, well, look, I paid a boatload of money to this firm, but at least I know everything's covered. That's the only bill I'm going to have to pay. But it's not. You've got these things called co-pays, and you know, and they're constantly looking for ways to not pay out because that's how they generate a profit. Right. And you know, it's not private sector. It's not market driven if they're not in search of profit. So the incentives are perverse,
and it's all about them being answerable to us. It's way down deep. It's a very, you know, a political thing that they should be answerable to us because we are important. The individual consumer is more important. You know, think about what if we ran the police department as a private sector, which we did years ago, and who gets protected? Well, only the wealthy. Yeah. So there is no protection whatsoever for the poor, where there's actually more likely to be a lot of crime. And, you know, because if you want to make a profitable police department, you don't sell a subscription to someone who's actually going to need police protection. Or when you do, it's considerably more expensive. So the whole idea that it's centered. Another example I use a lot when I'm giving talks on this and so forth is, what if the U.S. Army was a private sector undertaking? It'd be like you'd hear, hello, are you the woman of the house? Yes, I am Captain Johnson. Are you afraid of Canadians? Me too. And so we have 3 levels of protection against Canadian incursion, you know, and you'd have to sell a subscription like this. And then the U.S. Army would have to train troops. Well, we would certainly all be speaking German now. Mir lied to all our German listeners. But if that's the way we actually ran the military, and everyone would say, well, that's stupid. We can't do it that way.
Not to mention, most of the salespeople would be going to try and insure people who are very much inland and away from places vulnerable to incursion.
Precisely. I went through in the piece a number of possible solutions for the fact that the United States pays more per capita than any other nation and has the worst infant mortality and life expectancy of any developed nation. So what the hell's going on here? So now I went through a number of solutions, and I reread it this morning, and ultimately it came down to this. You can't do this by a profit. Profit doesn't make sense. Now we're down to a political decision. Do I think it should be a basic right of people in my country to get national defense, to get police protection, to get fire protection, to get health? And, you know, the other thing is it's much cheaper to provide it not through the private sector. We cut out a major part of what the private sector does, and that is spend a lot of time figuring out how healthy you are, determining whether or not they're going to pay for something. No, we pay for everything now. Now, I was reading a piece this morning from, I think, Boston University, from a professor there about the feasibility of doing a universal health care here. And he's absolutely right. It is obviously the most logical solution, but it's going to hurt people. And it's going to hurt people who have a lot of money. And that's the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical industry. He says those players are not going to go quietly. Yeah, although I have to say, I have an establishment Democrat friend who's all worried because she's against Sanders and for whoever the
unsanders.
Yeah. But she said, well, we can't have universal health care because that will hurt a lot of people. Well, you know what? The Emancipation Proclamation hurt a lot of people. I mean, if I was a slave owner in the South, and then this was a major hit on my standard of living, that I'm no longer allowed to own other human beings. But I don't care. And furthermore, this is also now we have your lower level players in these industries as well that aren't driving Mercedes and so forth. But that's why we have a job guarantee. That's why we need that as well. So yes, there will be people who are hurt because they're the ones who are the administrative costs for private health insurance is as high as 24%. For Medicare and Medicaid, it's 4% because they're not spending money on advertising. They're not spending money on trying to figure out, who we should and shouldn't insure. They're not spending money on whether or not we should pay out and so forth. So, again, the biggest problem Americans face in terms of this ever becoming a reality is the healthcare industry itself, of course, is so powerful. And they will be hurt. And those executives and those stockholders will be hurt. But if we decided every policy like that, we would have no Emancipation Proclamation. The thing that does give me some hope is the younger generation in the U.S. that they lean. There's been a lot of stories lately about how many young Americans have a favorable view of socialism. I'm not entirely sure they know how they're defining that, but that's really beside the point because what they're really saying is they have a negative view of the status quo. And that's absolutely necessary if we're going to have any change. One of my colleagues in the university, his daughter says that the solution is that your generation needs to hurry up and die. And then that way, they can go out and vote in these changes. Yeah. Capitalism has failed in the sense that we have allowed it to become we've allowed it to move away from the competition and the responsiveness that it was supposed to be. We've allowed power to accumulate. And so that's what these young people are experiencing in the U.S. They're getting done with college. They can't. My poor kids are loaded down with debt. And so we are, worried to death about how they're going to be able to pay this off. That wasn't true for me in my generation. My generation that acts so high and mighty regarding these kids that are coming out right now. And I have to say, I can see it at the university with my students that they feel like they're getting screwed and don't even begin to talk about climate change because they really know they're getting screwed on that. So I am somewhat hopeful that it may be possible to introduce real reforms if the younger people can carry the day. But as long as the old white men are the ones voting in the U.S., then I don't know. Have you seen that movie, Ian Carmichael and Peter Sellers and I'm All Right, Jack?
I haven't seen it, actually, which is terrible. I use that phrase all the time. And
brilliant. It's about Ian Carmichael is a recent college graduate and wants to go into industry. And it's all about the conflict between labor and management. And it's a bit like Animal Farm, where in the end, you're like, well, gosh, they're both screwing each other, screwing everybody over.
I think you'd really sort of cut to this. Somebody was just superficially listening to what we're talking about. The phrase, look, capitalism has failed. That could jump right out at them, but there's a bit more finesse to the way you say that. In your writing, you say, under this heading, which I love, capitalism as the anti-business system, or assumptions necessary for markets to be useful.
Right.
And then you end that chapter by just finessing the Adam Smith quote, going, people of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy to violate the assumptions necessary for free markets to yield competition, or in some contrivance to affect the political process for their gain. So it's not necessarily, what we're saying is that this thing that we live under, gets called capitalism, it has undermined markets, So,
yeah.
And maybe the thing we need to do is just cleave this whole false dichotomy of, there's either government and then there's markets, and the two of them are opposing forces. Markets are government, really.
Exactly what I was just thinking.
As soon as that understanding is baked into the cake of the electorate, we'll stop making these silly decisions and empowering these top-down tyrannies, as Chomsky calls them, namely corporations.
Capitalism is a particular set of rules. People talk about capitalism being freedom. It's a particular set of rules. There's no such thing as any kind of economic interaction that it isn't by a particular set of rules. It's just that it's our set of rules, so we kind of think of it as natural. And we're also encouraged by those who are most successful under the system to believe that it is somehow natural and free. Indeed, we need to break apart this dichotomy to remember that capitalism doesn't work without the oversight of the government. It's funny, Melanie and I were eating pork last night while on TV, a special on pig was on, and Melanie suggested we should perhaps turn it off because the lack of supervision. And one of the new things they're doing in the U.S. apparently is empowering the firms to regulate themselves. Okay, that's a great idea. So I think we should extend that. Murderers should turn themselves in and try themselves. And thieves and so forth. Gosh, what a savings this would be on the part of police forces and the judicial system. So there's a reason why the government was there checking on it. Is because it's not in their best interest. That's if you want to get into climate change. That's a huge problem with climate change. It is not in any industries. I shouldn't say any industries. Obviously, industries with cleaning up the environment, but in general, and it is not profitable to worry about future generations and to keep your toxic waste out of the river. And it is not profitable to insure unhealthy people. It is not profitable to insure people who will need the insurance and to pay out once they make the claim.
Yeah. No, let's just jump track here. I wanted to apply the market fetishization to mass transit. We privatise trains over here.
Oh, yes.
And it's a disaster.
Yes.
I don't think anybody would argue. And now, I posted something on Facebook about trying to just get somebody to tell me how the market mechanism would work in the case of trains. Yeah. You'd have to have at least 2 sets of rails going from, say, London to Manchester. Right. And then the company that's bad at running the service goes out of business and those rails get rusty and, leaving only the excellent firm. But put to one side that the 4-firm concentration ratio won't make it competitive, so you've got like dozens of rails going everywhere. How can firms possibly compete themselves into higher standards in a mass transit system like that? Isn't it a natural monopoly, basically?
I was just going to use that expression. Same thing as electricity. That it is not from an engineering standpoint. It doesn't make sense to have 10 companies supplying electricity to Fort Worth, where I live. That actually, from an engineering standpoint, it makes more sense to just have one. But then you've got the problem of, and going back to that over and over and over, accountability. Are they accountable to me? And that's why they are regulated. Although oftentimes the people who sit on the regulatory boards are former members of that company, which is not a good idea. But anyway.
That's the next problem, isn't it? Yeah. How do you avoid regulatory capture?
No, absolutely. It makes no sense whatsoever. Like roads. I'm sure in the UK as well, there are toll roads. We have a couple here in Fort Worth. You don't need 10 sets of roads. So what do you do in those cases? Well, the logical thing is, and get the politics and the morality, which doesn't belong there, out of it. The logical thing is to have one road, but make sure that it's up to standard.
So this goes into the basically the barriers to entry. What did you call easy entry? Point of your necessary conditions.
Oh, and airlines too, of course.
Say again?
Airline manufacturing right now. I'll be very curious. Yeah, I mean, because Boeing is struggling right now for obvious reasons. The 2 plane crashes, which apparently. Word is coming out that they knew about these problems, but guess what? It's not profitable to pursue that. And the regulatory agency was like, yeah, close enough. And then we have 200 or 300 people dead because of it, and an entire fleet grounded. And I'll tell you who I feel sorry for that isn't necessarily mentioned. We have a local airline here in Texas called Southwest Airlines. They were set to buy all kinds of those aircraft to replace their fleet. Well, they're screwed now. I mean, so obviously that's not nearly as tragic as it would for the people. But, just sort of a secondary effect here is that, without the proper regulation, we have stopped enforcing antitrust laws. The banking industry, we can get into the finance as well. It's another horrible situation where there's absolutely no incentive to enforce the laws that are in place when one day you might work for that bank.
Yeah.
If you're a federal regulator and your ultimate goal is to actually really make some real money and work for Citibank, then I'm sure as hell not cracking down on Citibank. So everything's screwed, isn't it? And let us hope that this younger generation will come out and vote.
So it might be worth just you then apply your framework that you lay out in the paper to what is called Obamacare. Now, I don't quite know what the state of repealing Obamacare is in the States, but I heard a lot of people at the time going, Obamacare is also Romney care.
Yes, yeah.
It was, so it wasn't this radical raft of policies.
Right.
Basically the big money had gotten to the Democrats, and you've got this massively defanged raft of policies. Yeah. It was more of a gift to the insurance industry, or am I being hyperbolic?
Well, I don't know enough about it, to be honest. I do know that a lot of the people that I respect in economics were, I don't want to say outraged, but what else should we expect in a world where the insurance companies are running everything? And I quoted in the paper there, apparently the stock prices for various health insurers went up after Obamacare went into play. Because if anything, what they were doing was they were giving them more power by saying everyone has to be insured. Yeah. So now we may subsidize it for you.
Yeah. So here's some vouchers. Here's some tokens for you to now put into the
have more customers than they did before. But there's still no nonprofit option. There's still no option that doesn't depend on I need to insure. And people complain that the premiums went up. Well, one of the things that Obamacare said was that you could no longer offer crap insurance. And so, now that you actually have something covered, it's more expensive. So now, turns out they had a very difficult time repealing, which was, of course, now we have to worry about World War III. So I guess that's a completely different, situation. But
the reason that I brought up Obamacare was because, you could just say, oh, well, the black president brought out the racists, and I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
But then there was also this thing that they could point to going, look, they promised you healthcare. They promised you things were going to get better, the Democrats. Right. And they didn't, and it's my understanding that there are a lot of people in the sort of middle income people whose costs went up, but the benefits that they got from it didn't go up, so they felt a bit like that. That's the worst of government intervention. Where,
of course, that had been happening anyway, though. And so now you've got this different framework because the costs have been going up like crazy for years, but we didn't have the government to blame for it. And now when the costs go up, that's because of Obamacare.
That's Obamacare,
So I don't really know how much there really is. I'm sure there are people who are hurt. I'm sure that's true. But I wonder how much of it is, my health care never went up before this. Well, of course it did. It went up every year, and you never really knew what you were getting. And it was that was the reason why. And you brought up uninsured people earlier. Have you ever seen that little graphic? Percentage of uninsured people in Britain, in France, in Germany, in the United States. It's 0, 0, 0, and closer to 0 now since the Affordable Care Act. But anyway, so and if I may just say very quickly about can we afford it? And of course, we've been seeing a lot of this on the groups we hang out in on Facebook. But hey, how come nobody's saying, "Geez, can we afford a war with Iran?" Nobody's brought that up. Can we afford, universal health care? Well, it's not about money. It's about resources. And when I try to talk to people about this, I say, okay, first of all, could we afford universal health care that offered exactly what we're getting right now in terms of health, benefits? Well, obviously, because we're already doing it. So, yes, we can afford that.
The real stuff is there.
Yeah, that's right. The resources are there. Would we, if we expanded healthcare to more people, need more doctors and nurses and so forth? Well, yeah. Is that bad? I mean, it's like saying, well, now that we had to fight the Nazis and the Italians and the Japanese and the Bulgarians and the Hungarians and the Romanians and the Finns. I hate to leave anyone out. Then once we had to fight them, we had to have a bigger army. Yeah, you're right. We do. I mean,
just say, look, we're talking about World War II here, right? If
sorry.
It's not. Has something just popped up on Twitter?
No,
are you guys now at war with everyone?
Nobody said after Pearl Harbor. Well, I don't know. Can we afford a war with Japan? Let's have a look at the money.
Well, they didn't. They didn't go. All right. Well, now we've declared war. Oh no, we're going to have to hire a load of soldiers now.
Right.
We're going to have to expand.
So can we offer more? A higher level of insurance than we have right now? Well, unless we're the crappiest developed country on the planet, which we're in the running for with your country, then although not in this area, then yeah, we probably can. So I don't have the statistics for that or anything, but could we have a higher level, for less money? Now, money, the cost or the ability to provide the service is not about money, but the impact is. All right, so some of the impact is about money because, as I've said already, first of all, the people in the health insurance industry are going to be hurt. If there are more doctors, might the average salary be lower? I don't know. It could. I mean, also there'll be more demand as well. But gosh, God forbid if everyone were healthier and didn't need to go to the doctor. So there are distributional effects.
It's worth mentioning that there's a quote in your paper, and it goes something like this. When you suggest introducing universal healthcare, government-run universal healthcare, people go, well, you're going to have to bring in rationing. Do you want to take it from there?
Precisely. It's already being rationed. And I have to say, hats off to the Wall Street Journal when they were talking about universal healthcare, and they made that very point. Well, first of all, it's already rationed. It's a question of how should we ration it. And so, right now we ration it by largely by income. The more income you have, then and that reminds me of something else I was going to say earlier. The more income you have, the more health you get. My wife would be dead right now if we didn't have really good insurance because she got a colonoscopy and they discovered cancer, and most people can't afford to go do that. And I was just looking at the income statistics for the United States yesterday, putting together one of my classes for next semester, and it's horrifying how poor some Americans are. But and they're not 16-year-olds. The average age, I think, was like 47 or something like that of families in the bottom 20%. But they're not getting help. They're not getting preventative care. They're finding out about cancer when it's too late. And so it is killing people. All right. It's not like, oh, well, it would be nicer if we, had more health care. No, people are dying because of it. And I don't know. It's just being all confused by the people who are trying to maintain their vested interest in it, and those who are selling this as in this sort of hidden racial terms that we don't want to help black people because who is it that's not getting it in this country? And that's the poor, and they're going to be overrepresented in the ranks of the poor. So anyway, my wife would be dead, Anyway,
this is why it kind of it made me a little bit angry. I think it was Pete Buttigieg on the campaign trail. He said something like, "The government shouldn't be telling you which doctor you can have." Yeah. It's arrogant of the government to come in, and so his idea is, I'm going to make all the right noises about being for having a public option in healthcare, but we're not going to touch the private system. He was, I think, basically signaling to anybody that cared, particularly the money people, I don't worry, you're going to be safe if I'm president. And so it's like, the government shouldn't tell you which doctor you should have. No, it's much better to have your income make that choice for you, because that's freedom.
Yeah, and I assume he made this speech in the wine cellar when he had I don't know if you read about that over there.
Wine cave.
Oh, wine cave, right, wine cave. Yeah. I don't think the government should tell me who the commandant of the Marine Corps should be. I don't think the government should tell me what police officers I get in my neighborhood. Well, of course they do. And I mean, nobody complains about that. Oh, I had a wonderful conversation with a neighbor. There are two neighbors down the street when we first moved here, elderly couple, the only other ones with Democrat yard signs out in their yard. So they invited us over. And they also invited another neighbor. And we got to talk about, this gentleman's son is a police officer here in Fort Worth. He's very proud of him, and as he should be. But then the conversation turned to Obama, and he started calling him a socialist, and I said, I wish he was. And I said, I'm against him too, because he's not doing the things you think he's doing. Then he says, so you're in favor of socialism? I said, well, your son works in the socialist sector. In the police department, it's from each according to their ability. So we pay through taxes by our ability to pay, to each according to their needs. All I got to do is pick up my cell phone and dial 911, and a police they don't ask for my credit card number. They show up because I had a prop, and I don't even have to be a taxpayer. That you could be in the United States, and you are entitled to police protection as well. He said, well, all of us paying the taxes. Well, Christian doesn't, and yet he's still entitled to police protection. So I explained this to this gentleman, that his son, he's so proud of, and rightfully so, is in a socialist part of the government, or of the economy. Well, that's okay. Well, why? Well, because we've already got it. Okay, all right. So that was the extent of our... But I have to tell you, the elderly couple who had invited us over were having the time of their lives watching this argument. I think they just brought us, kind of like getting, bees in a jar and shaking it and seeing if they'll fight with each other and stuff. So that's basically what they did. Anyway.
But yeah, I think we rhetorically, we need to really go after the competition and choice narratives. I can't see any way around it. I can't see this Buttigieg sort of third way working at all. Yeah. I think the best way I can put it is to go, all right, there's 2 hospitals in your community because there's competition, because that's the way we like it, right? One's better than the other, right? Because, they can't be equally as good, because then we don't have competitive markets, right? One's better than the other. Whose kids deserve to go to the slightly less good one? Right. Presuming that it's only slightly less good. It might be awful. Whose kids deserve to go there? Whose kids deserve to go to the less good school? Right. Is it the kids that chose slightly less wealthy parents? Yeah. I think it's that simple. You either, right. And to me that just goes, so it's a human right, isn't it? Yeah. And then the other thing is, if you want to insist on being ultra right wing about it, okay, right, we just let people die in the streets. If they don't have the money to stop them dying in the streets, just let them die in the streets. But then the problem with that is you will be at full employment. Right. And that's really bad for inflation. Yeah. So, if you can't get them to care about people just dying in the streets, maybe you can get them to care about inflation.
They say over here you can pretty much tell a person's life expectancy, whatever, by their zip code or in the UK, by their postal code. And then you're done. Because it's really about income and about the options you have because of that income in a society where so many options are being rationed, as all options are, but by income and not by, but we do a bit better job in things like we give scholarships at universities. Okay, so you're really good at school. Now, obviously, that's also going to be influenced by the education you had up to that point, which is going to be affected by income. But we do try to some extent, allocate educational services by your ability to take advantage of it rather than just income, although that's obviously not completely separated. But.
Yeah. Well, when people go, so you just want everything to be the same. What have you got against excellence? What have you got against excellent schools? And I'm like, actually, instead of going, no, there should be, backing off and going, there should be competition, and go, no, actually, I don't want any choice. I want there to be what I want it to be when it's time for my kid to go to school, whether my kid is on the autism spectrum or whatever. The idea is there's one school in your community that's close to you, wherever you live, and it is the best that we can have. Just like back when the NHS was more functional, they were all at the highest standard they could be at because we understood how this stuff worked. You either guarantee everybody the same stuff, or you present them with this false dichotomy of competing services that aren't really competing. So I want the school to be the best it can be and differentiate for different abilities. And and until it gets there, the system is failing. But I don't think we fix it by going, all right, let's pit this failing institution against one that's slightly better, and like runners in a race. It just doesn't work like that. It's a nice metaphor to draw, but it doesn't work like that in reality.
And what we do is we then starve the losers in reality. It's been a terrible assault on public schools, which, do you still use public for private in the UK?
Yeah.
By public school, I mean the one that everyone's allowed to go to because they pay for it in their taxes.
Yeah.
But what we do over here is, if the school's not doing well, we starve it of resources. Oh, well, geez, what if we did that in the military? Well, this project for this new F-22 fighter isn't going well, so let's give them less money next year.
Yeah.
No, throwing money away at a bad problem. No. You're allocating resources to trying to solve a problem. And quite honestly, the biggest problem from one school district to the next is the incomes of the students' families who go to school there. My wife gets so annoyed. She's a public school teacher. When they have really good schools. Oh, really? In the neighborhood where everyone's in the top 20% of income earners, they have really good schools? That they don't have, isn't it strange they don't have bad schools there? When in the United States, the way schools are funded is local property taxes. Well, guess what? They got a crap load of money. I'll tell you one more thing about that. Years ago here in Texas, maybe 20, 25 years ago, they passed a law saying that the rich school districts had to give some money to the districts. And the rich school districts, oh, no, we have to cancel the chess club. Oh, no, You know what my wife's school got? Carpet in the library. And she said it made such a difference. It was quiet in the library. Before, it was just a linoleum floor. So we're not talking about people having crazy extravagances. There's going to be differences. But, there's an underlying assumption here that you and I are making, and that is that income is not a reflection of ability. Because if it were, then it's okay the way it is.
But then, it doesn't get over that sort of like when you're dealing with your children, your children being punished for like the you know what I mean, whatever the income is.
Unless we believe that it's all about genes, and so my kids are going to be naturally superior, so therefore they should get the better advantage. I mean, I'm speaking from hearing other people say this.
Right, yeah.
Because my school's it's a private school. It's not a really, really wealthy. Well, I say that. We looked at the income distributions the other day, and the average income, I believe, of a TCU, Texas Christian University family was $180-some thousand a year. So, there's a lot of wealthy people there. But there are certainly some people there who feel like I am succeeding not because my father gave me a small $1 million loan, as our current president says.
That's one of my favorite Trump quotes.
Yes. And there's all these extra advantages, but I'm succeeding because I'm good. All right. I'm better than everyone else. And so I think that's a very powerful part of the self-delusion that takes place that also drives the richer school districts or neighborhoods should get the better schools because they'll be able to take advantage of it. And after all, that will help the poor kids one day when my kids create, businesses where they can work. So I don't know how you fight that. But again, I think that the biggest thing that's pushing back against that now is climate change and the economy that students are facing in America coming out of college, and that is affecting, not just poor kids, obviously, because they're going to college, and they're pushing back. Finally, I co-taught a women and gender studies class last semester, and granted, you're going to get a different cross section of people in there, but they're fed up. They're absolutely fed up with my generation and how we screwed everything up for them and then act all high and mighty about them. Have you read these things over there? Millennials are destroying the restaurant industry because they're not going out to eat. Well, first of all, I don't know if you understand how capitalism works. If your industry isn't working, that's your fault, not mine, all right? And second, it's because they got no money, all right? So that was literally a piece on how millennials were destroying the boating industry. They weren't buying enough boats, and it's their fault.
There's a great media commentator on, he's on social media, but he's written for The Nation, and he does a podcast called Citations Needed, and the guy's name is Adam Johnson. Citations Needed is an amazing podcast. They did a whole episode about this generations idea, that they're actually pitted against each other, and it's just a media trope. It's not really, they don't have the same class interest. Not everybody born between these years and these years are the same. Some of them are eating avocados. Guess what?
It's sort of a pop psychology. I want to explain everything that's going on in the world with this one simple explanation.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I will say that the new generation is pissed off. They don't have faith in the system.
You would not be rational if you weren't pissed off. I'm not their generation. I'm pissed off, and I'm actually pissed off at my parents' generation. As well. I think they really drank the neoliberal Kool-Aid.
Right.
It's easy to be. It's easy to, with the length of hindsight we've got now, to say that that's what happened. But even now, we're still getting the how are you going to pay for it stuff when it comes to healthcare and education. And really, the bottom line is, if our nation as a whole was as smart as it could possibly be, because that's where we, put our spending.
Right.
We probably wouldn't be having these problems we've got now.
No.
Even if that was like inefficiently allocated because it was, government spending and not market driven. I don't think the opposite in this example that we're using. I don't think the opposite of inefficiency is efficiency. The opposite is destruction. Well, these institutions are crumbling. Our brain trust is rotting.
The word efficiency, economists use that word a lot, and people take it to mean some sort of engineering concept, but it's not. In economics, literally what efficiency means is the speed and ease with which consumer preferences show up in prices and production. For example, if Marks and Spencer's were to burn down every single franchise, but their stock price stayed high, that would be a very inefficient market. It should go down as quickly as this information becomes available, so its stock price collapses. So that's all it means. And so, for example, in a racist society, say in the American South in the 1940s, if black Americans had been paid the same wage for the same job as white Americans, we would have to argue that the market was very inefficient because people's values were not being translated into economic outcomes. So it's not about, we need to make the market more efficient so that black people don't get paid as well. That's what you would be saying by saying more efficiency. So economists toss this word. I've said this to my mainstream colleagues, and they were like, oh, yeah, I never thought of it that way. But that's all you're saying. You're not saying engineering. You're saying, are my values, which could be really crappy, are they being translated into prices and output? So anyway, that's something that struck me, is that we toss around all part of this rhetoric that's used. Toss around this word efficiency, as if we all mean the same thing by it. And even those professionals that are using it often haven't really thought about what they mean by it. Not me, though. Yeah, I thought about it.
That's because you're really smart.
That's right. Yeah. My 12 years of private schooling from Catholic school. Yeah. Although I then went to a state institution after that. Yeah. Not one like a mental institution, but a university. Yeah.
So maybe we should round off with. So we've talked a lot about whether markets are the appropriate tool and to distribute healthcare, and it's a big fat no, basically, isn't it? At best, a very skeptical maybe in a universe that was way different to this, and so Medicare for all is. It was never there before as an option. Yeah. It's there now. Yeah. The Overton window shifted in that respect for Americans, and so the way MMT can help with this shift is, the big pushback to Medicare for all is how are you going to pay for it? And right. Now. How do you like to say that?
Well, it's funny because you don't even need MMT to point out that we already let's do the fiction that money really is the resource. We pay more per capita than any other nation on the planet, and get among the worst healthcare. So, I mean, you could even sort of follow the line of it would be cheaper, but if you want to go the real MMT route and the real post-Keynesian and institutionalist route, is that it's about resources. Do we have the ability to do we have the resources for either we have the resources or we don't. We clearly have the resources to provide the current level of care. That's beyond question. And if every other nation on the planet, developed nation, does a better job than us, then I got a feeling we can do better than what we've got. So, and so you've got to quit thinking money. Money is, I shouldn't say irrelevant, because money's the political part, and money's the part where it's going to have impacts on people. But if you want to know, can it be done? Is it feasible? Absolutely. There's no question. We have the ability to do this. And anyone who says otherwise just doesn't understand the economics.
It's worth reinforcing as well. The US is the richest country of all time. And we don't just mean the numbers on the screen, the dollars. We mean the resources that you've got. So it seems to me a point of logic that, of course, you could do healthcare better than anywhere else in the developed world because you've got more resources than anywhere else in the developed world. So it would be a great thing for you guys to shoot for, I think. But, you know, what do I know?
I have 3 citizenships. I have my U.S., my U.K., and my Irish. So I have backup plans. So,
right.
And you asked, actually, your original question was, what's my feeling about this, or am I trying not to have one? I'm trying not to have one. I'm trying to do what I think is, Jamie Galbraith, I was at a conference with him a couple of years ago, and I said, first of all, is there any hope for mainstream economics to rescue them? And he said, no, I don't think so. And then he said, so what do we do? He said, well, we talk to politicians and to policymakers. And I said, what are our odds? He said, what does it matter? You just got to do what's right. What does it matter what the odds are? So, and that's absolutely right. You got to keep. I can't let myself get hung up on whether or not I think we can win.
You remind me of Chris Hedges, award-winning journalist, really brave writer. His quote is, "I don't fight fascists because I'll win. I fight fascists because they're fascists."
Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah. I have nothing to add to that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been great talking to you, John. And, let's just keep pushing because, like you say, it's when you're talking to Jamie Galbraith and he's agreeing we've got to go after policymakers. Well, they get dragged along by the zeitgeist, by the public spirit, don't they? And even if we've got to go one person at a time and go, look, this is where the money, quote unquote, comes from. Okay, now we've got that bit solved. How do you want to live? Even if we have to go one person at a time, which maybe we're doing with this podcast, we're fighting. We're fighting.
Amen, brother. May the force be with you.
Okay, John. Thanks for your time. You're so generous.
Yeah, thank you. Talk to you later.
That was the MMT Podcast with Patricia Pino and Christian Riley. Don't forget, you can support the show through Patreon, starting at $1 a month, and get early access to all our episodes and patron-only episodes. You can do that by going to patreon.com/MMT Podcast. You can also find me on Twitter at MMT Podcast, and you can find Patricia on Twitter at Patricia N. Pino. And you can email us at mmtpodcast@outlook.com. Editing and post-production was by Damien Caldwell. Thanks for listening.